I am not, as you know, or many of you know, a gardener. I am, however, an appreciator of good food. And this is the beginning of the season when it is difficult not to be excited about food. Just this week, I ate my first garden lettuce of the season. It was soft and sweet and heaven. I am so lucky to have friends who garden and love that. I also had my first strawberry shortcake. And even as I enjoy much that has happened in the past couple weeks, much has happened in the last couple of weeks to cause me to think differently, perhaps more broadly about food, where it comes from, and how it gets from where it was to our plates. The first push came from the CSIU and the arrival of the Vargas family. The CSIU did us a huge favor by coming to Marie and saying exactly what they needed to support people who are coming to this area to plant, tend, and process food. The Vargas family have not only offered us a personal connection, they've offered us a glimpse of the work they're doing, the labor and risk it entails, and the sacrifices in their lives to do it. Thinking back to the sermon Lenore offered last week, which was a very interesting examination of who we are as a larger faith community. And if you haven't, is it up? I don't know whether it's up. Well, oh, it was, all right, but we can send it out. I can send it out to you. It's really fun. It's the 7 deadly sins of Unitarian Universalism. And they used the acronym WHISPER, and each letter had a thing. And the I in WHISPER for UUism was intellectualism. We may have an intellectual understanding of the costs of food production, but we are insulated from another I, from a deeper, perhaps more visceral understanding by who we are as individuals and as a community. And we are thus able to remain somewhat ignorant, one more I, about what is real and happening. We live in an agricultural valley. It's not as if we don't know there are large canning factories around here. How many times have we been late to something because we've been driving behind a truck stuffed to the gills with tomatoes or peas? And yet, I've never really thought about how the tomatoes got to that truck and from the truck to the can. The Vargas family, by sitting with us here, has offered us perspective about their lives and dreams, as well as the invitation to consider food production in our valley and our country. There is nothing less intellectual than a ripe tomato, warm from the field. But it's important to know how it grows. Let's be clear, intellectualism isn't all bad. I was at my docks the other day, and, by the way, I want to say that walking and swimming has brought down all of my blood work to the excellent status. So it's a great thing. So as Sarah and I walk and talk about you all, we're doing good, right? It's not usually gossip, right? But Doug and I have a hard time getting to all the health stuff as well as the community and getting all the community stuff into our visits. And he told me about his Episcopal parish's blessing of the fields and ponds. Every year they go to a farm and walk the perimeters of the land and bless it and follow it with communion. It keeps people aware of the land and what comes from it. The other day, when I was with the kids talking about how different traditions celebrate food, I realized that we have no religious food traditions in UUism. I don't think I've ever said it that clearly to myself before. We say, oh, so easily that we affirm the web of life, but we don't celebrate it. That's nuts. It's crazy. I've asked this question before, but what would it look like if we were to celebrate food? What would it look like if we were to bless coffee hour and the conversation that happens? How many of us say grace? I easily say grace at a gathering. I'm often asked to, although I say easily. I mean, sometimes it's like, I'm a Unitarian, and I come from the Presbyterians, and we always prayed from books. We never did that spontaneous praying out loud, so it's like, bless this food. Okay. It's always a great place to start, though. So, but as a single woman who often eats in stages, do I stop every time I'm about to eat and say thank you? Even when it's the first strawberry shortcake of the season. Isn't bless this food, those who planted and tended it, those who picked it, those who packaged it for my consumption. It isn't, may I use this bounty to be generous with the world. Instead of practicing mindfulness, we're practicing that great American spiritual practice called mindlessness. It seems to me it wouldn't be that difficult to have a monthly celebration of food. There are things we eat according to the season. Whether or not we grow our food, certainly at some point in the year we should celebrate macaroni and cheese. If Jean Weston is our patron saint of hospitality, shouldn't we think about honoring her legacy? It's sort of odd, isn't it? We're willing to step up for the human right of elimination as we talk about safe bathrooms, as we should. But while we enjoy food, we don't make it sacred. Some of us can probably be accused of making it precious, but do we transfer our love of food to a deep understanding of its sanctity and its scarcity in the lives of too many? If we did, would we be more generous to love flows? Would more of us work at food pantries? Would we pay more taxes if it meant that kids whose parents forgot, neglected, or were unable to pay their lunch bill had lunch every day, and that every child was allowed to participate in sports day, even if she didn't have an up-to-date lunch tab? Somebody talked on Facebook about stepping in to pay a kid's lunch bill so she could eat and go to sports day. That's crazy. How can we have kids who can't eat? And this was Lewisburg. Lovely, rich Lewisburg. The fullness of the earth and all it provides and how we agree to have that bounty supplied to us is something we should pay attention to. The opportunity to offer back something, even so minuscule as water jugs, to the people who are planting the fields is an important tie both to the process and to the people who labor. If we have a celebration of real food, not something processed, that celebrates the labor, the sustenance, and the art of food, then we get hooked into the economics and the history of food. We become, I think, people who concern ourselves with food justice. Because, as they say these days, serendipity, and then a period, and then you're going, what? Right. But my neighbor handed me a book entitled Enrique's Journey, which talks about the immigrants from Central America, why they make the horrible, risky journey north, what they encounter along the way, what they endure to send money home to their children. It examines what happens to their children when they come to the north to be with their mothers. This is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist account that she was moved to explore as she came to know the woman who kept her house. A long time after this woman had been with them, she said, the woman from, I think she was maybe from just Central America somewhere, I'm sorry. But she said to her, the woman she worked for, she said, "You've been married a while, aren't you going to have kids?" And she was sort of, she goes, "Well, what about you? You only have one child." And at that point, the woman started to cry and said, "No, I have 5. And they're all back home." And then one of those children came up, and it's the story of the child who at 11 made the journey north, and the 20 years in between as he, and the next, from 11 to 35, I think, as he moved around and got here and almost got sent home. And it's a really, I can't even read it straight through. I really have to like open little pieces of it and close it up. And eventually I think I'll get there. But it's a painful and ugly account. It's a very hard read, but these people's lives and dreams and journeys are tangled up in our food. It's important, I think, to know whose hand tend our gardens. Some of us can say we're only going to eat food that we grow or can source. That's a wonderful and privileged viewpoint, and it isn't many of us who can. There may be projects that people can do around this, but I'm not sure that most of these projects are the projects of small churches. It would, however, be a wonderful thing for us to learn more about that food and the people who make our lives better. The CSIU, Central Susquehanna Intermediate Unit, is offering us small ways to be involved. Their work is mostly with the children of migrant families, or their work on this project. They're going to have some discrete tasks that we can accomplish with the help of friends. The water jugs are one of them. I figure we need 150, so let's go. Household kits are another, and I'm going off to Sunbury together, I think it's called. This week there's a lunch, and I'm going to talk to them once I get a list from what needs to be in household kits, and we can see if we can't get some other people help us. We can ask our friends. The S in whisper was stingy. It referred to people's not being willing to tell others that there's a good thing going on here. I think we're also stingy if we don't allow others to help us do good works. We're also being asked to help provide a day out at Knoebels. Since Sarah and I are already working on an interfaith picnic, this seems like a good time to do this. More about this later, but learning about how food is produced in the Susquehanna Valley and by whom, and contributing to these projects in every way we can, will make a difference in our lives and in those of others. Oh, the things we'll learn. Oh, the people we'll meet. And the meeting isn't always easy. I think maybe, I don't know if it was you, Lenore, who published this, but there was a Danish travel agency did a video did a project of people spending 4 minutes looking at each other. And they were all kinds of different people. It's stunning. And apparently there's some magic thing about 4 minutes that our brains soften and our hearts open. But there were great things that happened there where, these 2 straight men in their 60s were sort of, and finally, I'm not sure, some Slavic, or he was Scandinavian of some sort. He's looking at this man who I believe was Middle Eastern, and he finally goes, and you could see him, "I love your mustache." And the guy had one of those Middle Eastern, like, and the guy goes, it was just, that was really sweet. And then there was a woman probably in her late 40s who was looking at this man probably in his 30s, and she said to him, "Is your family with you?" And he said, "I am alone." And in that you knew he had no one. There was no one even in the world anymore that he had. And she sat there and got that and reached out her hands and said, "You won't be alone again. You're never alone." That's what we get to do. So while we're doing all this with CSIU, I had the opportunity to go to New Orleans. Chris offered the extra bed in her room while she was attending a conference. And in that weird kismet way, Ruth was at the same hotel while at another conference. We'd bump into each other in the halls, and we spent about an hour looking at souvenirs when the gods were trying to wash New Orleans from the face of the earth. UUCSV was there, right? I was thrilled to visit a friend and my niece. We got to see Sarah's new house and play in the hotel pool with kids. The kids are Evanses, after all. And that was magic. But on Friday, Sarah didn't work, and we packed the kids in the car and went off to the Whitney Plantation Slave Museum. I still don't know if I have words to talk about what I saw on this sugar plantation. I can say my ignorance about both the slave trade, my privileged ignorance about both the slave trade and the sugar industry is profound. They're such unpleasant things after all. It's so easy to look away. The implications in today's world continue to be profound, and I have to know that to understand racism's stranglehold on our country. What they're hoping to provide with this plantation museum is education and a place to start the conversation on race. John Cummings and Dr. Seck are looking to build a place of both understanding and hope. It's not that I'm not hopeful. I am, after all, an early adopter of Pollyannism, which was the P in Whisper. And I think I'm pretty good at that. Right? But I feel that there's a lot I have to learn about what forms the basis for our country's racism. And if I don't get that, can we we untangle everything? I certainly came away knowing I have to change. my understanding of what Daesh is up to, because American slavery was just as huge a tragedy and miscarriage of human injustice as any terrorist movement ever. It was sanctified by almost every American tradition. I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but the people in the North were no different than the everyday Germans during the rise of Adolf Hitler. Our economy was built on what the South provided. Slavery was one of the strongest pillars of the American economy. Sarah said the other day that the one course she didn't take at college and always regretted was Civil War history. I don't know that I took any history. I certainly didn't take any economics. And while I can read French poetry with a good accent and great understanding, I might have come to activism far earlier. Lenore said the other day, I've never thought of myself as an activist, but I guess I'm going to have to. Well, we all are. And I believe we are all already activists. Just a little jug makes a difference. At the plantation, John J. Cummings III is the founder of this museum. He bought the buildings and was going to develop it when he discovered the logs from the plantation during the height of its prosperity. He decided he had to do something and that he could. He's invested something like $8 or $9 million in this museum because of his own money. He hired Dr. Ibrahim Seck from Center Gambia as the director of research. 60% of the slaves on this plantation came from his region of the Gambia. As a sugar plantation, the mortality rate was 113%, as opposed to other plantations where there was a 25% death rate, which was fairly much in line with the rest of the world at that time. They kept buying slaves to keep up the demand, as this was one of the most profitable plantations in the country. But, as they say, they are not interested in guilt, because white people today didn't own slaves. They don't want to incite shame in the descendants of people who had no choices. It is a site of memory, a place that exists to further the necessary dialogue about race in America. They're looking for conversations that move us to hope, and from hope to new realities. We get to make that choice. It's why Sarah and I are hoping that this summer you will read Waking Up White, which pushes at the notion of white frailty, our great guilt that makes us unable to confront what our predecessors has done, what has happened in this world. We're invited to learn the history and then to create new history. Unitarian Universalism is a tradition where such things are possible. I was really interested today. I know we've said these things before, but to notice how frequently in the stuff that came to us from the Flower Communion, how frequently it said, we are not a group that has a creed. We are not a group that owes allegiance to any other belief. We're people who believe in what is right. So I believe things are possible, but only if we move from standing on the side of love, which is lovely, to working in the midst of it. Yes, we need to stand at the borders, and there's nothing wrong with getting arrested for justice, but we need to demand change and work for it right here in our beautiful river valley. There was another video this week that was really interesting, that was people looking at their DNA history. Actually, sorry, this is the one that was done by the Danish Travel Agency. They asked people what peoples they hated. And to a person, they found out that the nations they liked the least were nations in which they had ancestry. One woman found a cousin in this group of strangers, and damned if he wasn't from a country she hated, So there she was going like, and so there they were, crying. There was a lot of crying in videos this week. It was great. When I think about what we can offer our friends who are here for the summer, it is a sense of belonging. They've left behind all their relatives. Perhaps we can be abuelito and abuelita, tío, tía. Perhaps we can more consciously serve as that to one another and dare to lean on each other in times of need. I feel as if I spend a lot of time in this pulpit saying, I don't know, I don't understand. It's not the model of ministry I grew up with. Ministers knew the gospel and could speak with great certainty. And, actually, I've never really looked at the Jefferson Bible, and I don't know whether there's Paul in the Jefferson Bible. Anybody here? Is Tom here? What? It's just the four. Right, but really, much of the Pauline gospel is what enabled me, or pseudo-Pauline, is what enabled me to walk away and rethink things. When all the people who were enslaved were offered, because they weren't allowed to read, from the Bible was master or slaves obey your master. It wasn't until until emancipation, when they learned to read, that they found other things in Christianity. But there are acts of kindness which must be based in understanding. Not that lovely little random acts, not coffee for the next person at Starbucks. Deliberate acts, deliverance acts that stretch our hearts and hands further than we perhaps had planned. Acts that are possible because the need is great and we have one another to encourage us. Some people will know what we don't. Others will do what we can't. Each of us can make a difference, however, even if it's only leaning our weight into the movement the community takes and thus moving us forward. The pile of 1-gallon jugs should make us proud. This is the Sunday of our flower community. I was going to back up. I was going to say, it might be interesting next year, since we're looking at immigration, if as a community we did our DNA stuff and we had a map up. And we saw where we all came, how far we came to get to this place. And as in that vid, everybody was going like, yeah, I'm 100% what I am. And everybody was like, yeah, you're about 2% what you are, and everything else has changed. So I thought we can think about that. But look at the bounty on the table from this flower communion. After the service, we're invited to take home a flower not our own. I invite you to pick something wildly different from what you brought or might have thought to bring. Spend time with that flower this week, finding and appreciating its own particular beauty. Paying attention to the differences, celebrating the beauty of something we don't have, is a great start on our journey to peace. And if you can spend some time thinking about what you put in your body and being grateful to those who raised it and all the love and sacrifice and dreaming that went into the food before you, we will be better for that. Blessed be.